Hello and welcome to Inside Iraq. I'm Jasim al-Azzawi. General Petraeus claims a tipping point has been reached in Iraq. Skeptical Americans counter back. It's too little and too late. The war is lost. This surge bought President Bush 6 more months, but the majority of Americans demand, bring the boys home now. So did the Petraeus-Crocker testimony change U.S. public opinion or deepen already confirmed views? Ayman Muhyiddin reports.
It was one of the most anticipated reports on the Iraq War to date. Amid much media fanfare, the U.S.'s top general and diplomat in Iraq briefed the Congress on what, if any, progress President Bush's surge strategy has achieved. But did the report win over the American public, or was it seen as a political ploy by the White House?
Don't have any reason to believe that he wasn't reporting independently. But I do believe that our White House has a tendency to try and influence such testimony.
Some analysts believe the report was geared towards the president's party to stave off any major defections on a policy that is largely seen as having failed.
I think the Petraeus-Crocker testimony was aimed primarily at congressional Republicans. That's where President Bush is desperate to keep some level of control. There has been a sense that maybe some Republicans might shift and move with a Democratic move in Congress.
After Congress's summer recess, General Petraeus' testimony thrust Iraq back into the American political spotlight, with presidential candidates all positioning to spin the report in their favor. One thing the testimony certainly established was that the Iraq War and America's presence in Iraq will extend beyond the Bush presidency.
President Bush was playing for time, and the Petraeus-Crocker testimony buys time for the president and tosses the ball in the court of the Democrats, because President Bush announced that his successor would be the one responsible for determining the fate of Iraq and the fate of American troops there.
And for the American public, 70% of whom want the U.S. to pull out of Iraq, very few saw any positive signs that the surge was actually working.
David Petraeus works for the administration, so his report would naturally support whatever the president wants. That surge was uncalled for and is not helping us in any way. Somebody needs to take a much more realistic and unbiased view of the world.
For now, the only view most Americans will see is that of a president entering his final year in office with no clear end in sight to the Iraq War. Ayman Muhyiddin for Inside Iraq.
To find out whether General Petraeus succeeded in changing U.S. public opinion, we shall speak to 2 ordinary Americans and a professor of media and international affairs. First, we welcome Denise Sabbagh, a Washington immigration lawyer, and Matt Miller, a graduate business student at Yale University. Denise, millions of Americans and viewers worldwide were riveted to their TV sets watching the joint testimony by Petraeus and Crocker. You were one of them. Did he in any way change your opinion, whether positively or negatively?
He didn't change my opinion. A lot of what he said seemed to parrot what President Bush said, maybe a few different words here and there, but it seemed to be the same, that he was supporting the president. I think that he provided a certain amount of information, but I also think that what happened is that a lot of Americans are very confused about this. I think that many people want to pull out. There's the hawks that don't want to pull out, that think that we can win a war militarily. But I think that there's a very confusing situation, because I think that a lot of people feel like, though they don't want to pull out if it's going to really harm Iraqis or harm people, but they also don't really know.
Matt, did the general add to that confusion and clarity, or did he make it crystal clear so the positions are defined now?
Jasim, I would have to say, pardon me, that in fact I believe that there were no surprises whatsoever. What General Petraeus had to say was what anybody who takes any sort of analytical approach to the war, to the situation on the ground, already knows, that the status quo is being maintained, and that what we're trying to do right now is really avoid what could be worse, and the downside, the potential for far more casualties. And I mean, Denise, your point, I would say, was right on, particularly that there are so many parties involved right now, and so many perspectives in Washington, that what General Petraeus had to say, though in fact sounding a lot like what the president has to say was not a surprise.
Was he his own man, Denise, or was he pretty much towing the White House line?
Well, I think militarily he was his own man. I think he went in there. I think he did his job. I think that he was sincere in trying to determine what was really necessary. But, in the end, he works for the president, and I don't think that the president would have somebody get up there and give a speech that was antithetical to what the president was saying.
And yet, Matt, when you throw 30,000 extra soldiers at the crucible of Al-Anbar and Baghdad, eventually something has to happen. There has to be a measure of success. Do Americans believe that this surge served its purpose, perhaps temporarily tamp down the violence, or really we have reached a tipping point?
Well, the way I look at it is this. The surge did accomplish its goal. It did diffuse some of the problems, particularly in Anbar. And for the first time, there really is a spike between the different Sunni tribes and al-Qaeda in Iraq, in that the tribes are finally standing up. The economic incentives, the political incentives are just not there for them to facilitate the surge on an ongoing basis. However, I think it's really important to note that while that problem might have been fixed, the issue is that the number of Shiite militia groups and the number of attacks coming from Shiite groups has increased. So when you look at the surge as accomplishing one goal, there was an upside there, but there was an equal downside.
Well, I think that, at the end of the day here, it's unclear how much the Iraqis are able to help themselves. And, I think that what Americans would like to know is, what do the Iraqi people want? Do they want Americans out of Iraq? And if so, I think Americans would really like to hear that, because I think that people are torn, because what they don't want to see is Americans pull out and then have a huger tragedy than what we've already seen. And until that happens, I think that there's going to be a consistent confusion as to what to do. And that's why there isn't when you see the Democrats kind of pulling back a little bit because they're not sure, I don't think anybody's sure. And so until, I think, if the Iraqis, felt that they can really stand up, take care of themselves, I think that a lot of Americans would be saying, okay, let's get out now. A lot of them are saying that, but I also think there's this part of them that goes, but there's a concern for the Iraqi people that it doesn't harm them worse than they've already been harmed.
Denise, what I would say, and you made that point earlier that you thought that the general was mimicking the president. What I would say is that when questioned by Senator Warner in front of the committee, do you believe, General, that Americans in Iraq, American soldiers in Iraq, are keeping Americans at home safer? General Petraeus said he didn't know. And right there, I think the fact that there is so much uncertainty coming from the general himself, when questioned directly, I think that speaks volumes. And I think that, it's very hard to have a lot of confidence and a lot of stewardship as an American, as a voter, looking to see, which candidate I'm going to vote for in the next presidential election, when, the general and when the commander-in-chief, are also not necessarily on the same page.
Denise, the latest poll suggests something, that the testimony did not help President Bush. His approval rating is really at its lowest, 33%, perhaps just a little bit higher than Congress at 26%. So are the two things separated, the impact on the White House vis-a-vis the impact on the American street?
Well, I think that his ratings are low because I think that the American public doesn't feel that he's led in a way that has benefited the American public or the world. I think that the American public is looking for a leader that can lead with a respect and humanity for others, with a recognition that maybe war might be necessary, but you don't use war as the as an offensive position. And, we're living in the 21st century here. It seems to me that we would have gotten smart enough over the years to recognize that you can use war, and you can kill, you can maim, you can destroy infrastructures, you can destroy cities, but at the end of the day, you have to get back to talking, and you have to work it out. And so it seems to me that at this point, there should be more international conferences that really encourage people to come to the table so that we can work out these differences. So at the end of the day, the wars stop, and the innocent people are no longer being killed, because innocent people are being killed on both sides, and it's tragedy for the world.
Matt, to what extent what Denise just outlined now about the humanitarian aspect plays in the streets of Manhattan and Washington, D.C.?
I think that there's unfortunately very little resonance for that point, just like there's very little resonance for a lot of suffering that goes on worldwide over here on the street, simply by nature of the fact that life in the United States or in the Northeast is insulated even from the victims of Hurricane Katrina. But what I would say, and Denise, what I would take one step further, is to say that absolutely, without a doubt, there should be an international conference that includes the neighbors, all of the neighbors of Iraq, who all have interests in the situation, and with the different parties across the sectarian lines in Iraq. But I think what has been missing has been, instead of trying to get people to come to the table and try to work things out in terms of what they want, I think it's about what they don't want.
Matt Miller, Denise Sabbagh, thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq. We will take a short break now, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion. Stay with us.
The principle guiding my decisions on troop levels in Iraq is return on success. The more successful we are, the more American troops can return home.